Welcome to After Dark Online. Thanks for joining the program as we continue to explore the world through science, art, and human perception. My name is Sam Sharkland. I'm a program developer as part of the team that produces After Dark. And while this program is virtual, the Exploratorium is on Pier 15 in San Francisco, on unceded territory traditionally belonging to the Ramaytush Ohlone people. We recognize that we are guests on this land, and we honor the continued stewardship of the ecology we inhabit by the Ohlone people, both past and present. Now, if you tuned in last week, you heard our Director of Public Programs affirm our educational mission. That is, to offer you tools to better understand the world around you, to enable you to examine the systems that structure our experiences. We believe that this mission can be in service to the renewed urgency around offering accountability, representation, listening, and learning around systemic racism. So in this program, we're focusing on emerging systems of technology that have been demonstrated to be a marginalizing disservice to communities of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Even though technology can offer great conveniences when it works right, it can also serve dire consequences when it works wrong. Understanding how these technologies are designed and developed can help us collectively decide how to value them as a culture. To contribute to that conversation and that learning, we have two segments to share with you tonight. First, we have a video poem by Joy Buolamwini, who is the founder of the Algorithmic Justice League. It's a great title. Then we're going to have a long-form conversation with Dr. TIMNIT GEBRU. Dr. TIMNIT GEBRU is the technical co-lead of the Ethical Artificial Intelligence team at Google. She's an advocate for diversity in technology and is the co-founder of Black in AI, a community of Black researchers working in artificial intelligence. Prior to joining Google, TIMNIT did a postdoctorate at Microsoft Research New York City in the Fairness, Transparency, Accountability, and Ethics in AI group, where she studied algorithmic bias and the ethical implications underlying data mining projects. TIMNIT received her PhD from the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, studying computer vision under Dr. Fei Li. Her thesis pertains to data mining large-scale, publicly available images to gain sociological insight and working on computer vision problems that arise as a result. Some of the computer vision areas TIMNIT is interested in include fine-grained image recognition, scalable annotation of images, and domain adaptation. So in this conversation with my colleague Kathleen McGuire, TIMNIT speaks to machine learning technologies, especially surveillance technologies, and how they are used to oppress minority groups. She also shares with us how vision systems reveal implicit biases. On our website, on the After Dark page, you can find a compendium of resources that TIMNIT references in the talk. We encourage you to check them out. We hope you enjoy the show, and thank you for learning with us. We look forward to seeing you at the next After Dark Online.
My heart smiles as I bask in their legacies, knowing their lives have altered many destinies. In her eyes, I see my mother's poise. In her face, I glimpse my auntie's grace. In this case of deja vu, a 19th century question comes into view. In a time when Sojourner Truth asked, "Ain't I a woman?" Today we pose this question to new powers, making bets on artificial intelligence, hope towers. The Amazonians peek through windows blocking deep blues as faces increment scars. Old burns, new urns, collecting data chronicling our past, often forgetting to deal with gender, race, and class. Again I ask, ain't I a woman? Face by face the answers seem uncertain. Young and old, proud icons are dismissed. Can machines ever see my queens as I view them? Can machines ever see our grandmothers as we knew them? Ida B. Wells, data science pioneer, hanging facts, stacking stats on the lynching of humanity, teaching truths hidden in data, each entry and omission, a person worthy of respect. Shirley Chisholm, unbought and unbossed, the first Black Congresswoman, but not the first to be misunderstood by machines well-versed in data-driven mistakes. Michelle Obama, unabashed and unafraid to wear her crown of history, yet her crown seems a mystery to systems unsure of her hair. A wig, a bouffant, a toupee, maybe not. Are there no words for our braids and our locks? Does relaxed hair and sunny skin make Oprah the first lady? Even for her face well known, some algorithms fault her, echoing sentiments that strong women are men. We laugh, celebrating the successes of our sisters with serena smiles. No label is worthy of our beauty.
So thank you for joining us. And could we start by hearing just a little bit about you and your personal background and how that brought you to your current work?
Okay, so I had a very circuitous route, in my opinion, anyways, which I appreciate now. But at the time, I was worried about, excuse me, the circuitous. Wait, can you say the word? Circuitous path. And so I was born and raised in Addis Ababa, which is at the capital city of Ethiopia, and my dad was an electrical engineer, and my two sisters were also electrical engineers, and so I became an electrical engineer because it just seemed natural. I liked physics, I like math, and so, but I was also interested in music, so I decided I wanted to do a double major in music and electrical engineering. I finally just decided against a double major in music, but that interest in music kind of got me to work in audio engineering at Apple with a lot of other people who are engineers, but also like audio hardware team. So yeah, also like had a music background. And then I kind of was working on that more, and I went back to Stanford to do a master's and then a PhD, and I was working in that area. And then I started working with Audrey Ellerby, who worked in optics. And when I was working in optics, I was more interested in the image processing side of things. And then I took a computer vision class, and image processing class that also covered computer vision. Then I started getting interested in computer vision. And then I like left the PhD because I thought it wasn't for me. And then I went to like do a startup, and I kind of audited a few classes in machine learning and computer vision and stuff like that. And then I went to a hacker school, which is now called Recurse Center, which was like a retreat for programmers is what they call it, for 3 months in New York. And I had a great time. And like when I came back, I was kind of worried about what my next steps would be. Like I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I decided to give myself like a little bit of a just kind of like ease the pressure and just say, okay, like I'm going to start taking classes again because I could do that. And so I did. And I kind of eased back into the PhD, and I started working in Feifei's group and in computer vision. And then towards the end of my PhD, a confluence of things happened. Like I had been very worried about the lack of Black people, period, in not only in graduate school, but especially in this field. And I would see nobody at conferences and things like that when I traveled. I had been I started reading this Publica article and many others that talked about how some of these things were being used in real life in high stakes scenarios, like for example, to try to determine who someone's crime recidivism rates. And then of course, most importantly, I got introduced to Joy Buolamwini's work. I think she was starting to give talks, starting in 2015 even, about how open source face detection systems weren't detecting her face, but they were detecting like other lighter skinned people's faces, and they would detect her face when she put on a mask. So at that point, I started like advising her on her master's thesis, because we were introduced by a mutual friend, and then we published a portion of her thesis in 2018. By then, I had started doing a postdoc at Microsoft Research to get more acquainted with this field. So their team called FATE, Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Ethics. Then Meg Mitchell, my co-lead of the ethical AI team, asked me if I'd be interested in co-leading the team with her, and I was like, yeah. So I came to Google and back home. So I live in the Bay Area, which is a home for me.
And we're going to dig pretty far into your work in ethics and also your work with Joy, but I thought maybe we could start hearing what you think the potential of AI and computer vision is, and the ways you think it could be transformative in a positive way, or truly help people and not sort of in this efficiency space.
I'm actually struggling these days because I'm starting to see the computer vision community as very, very problematic. Very, very problematic. So one of the things my colleague Devin, who's also been involved in Black and AI since day one and is currently our treasurer, Devin Gilry wrote a paper right now on how to mitigate anti-Blackness, anti-Black racism in the AI community. And I hadn't even thought about this until he said it. He was like, think about it. All of these companies are coming out, against using face surveillance, or having certain kinds of policies. And the ACM, Associated Computing, what does ACM stand for? I forget. So computing, what's machinery? I don't know. Anyway, so ACM is a big body, academic body. Finally, late to the game and not enough by any means, but finally put out a statement. And here you have the computer vision community just chugging along, right? Like it's it's no statement, no nothing. And it's just like I'm seeing even the kinds of conversations that my colleagues in natural language processing or they have, and I cannot imagine that conversation in the computer vision field. And so I'm starting to see it as so problematic because it's the application is just dependent on the people, really, and what the people, how the people who are conceiving these research ideas and collaborating with people and getting funding and all that, deploy it, and what they care about, what they don't care about, who they tone police and who they uplift. Just recently I was in this Twitter debacle with Jan LeCun, and I saw like people in the computer vision field comparing me to authoritarian regimes, sharing like YouTube videos that were mocking me and other people from marginalized groups and all that. And I'm like, well, I can't imagine that group of people to be creating technology that's not harmful to people like me, right? On the other hand, you have people like Abel Barhana, who's also, similarly like getting all sorts of vitriol on Twitter, who just wrote a paper very recently that resulted in, again, leaders of the computer vision community having to take down one of the most well-known data sets, tiny images, out of MIT, take it down entirely, right? And it was because of people like her who are similarly ridiculed and tone policed and all that. And one of my colleagues was just, it was really sweet. Like they were writing like a Twitter appreciation thread, because I've just been getting so much vitriol, who are talking about how like in the vision community, like they describe me as an activist. And so I mean, this happened to me. I gave a talk at Caltech, and like Pietro Perona, like we had, he's one of the I hate this term, the fathers of computer vision. He's one of the old, like the senior leaders in the field. And like we had a conversation afterwards, and he was just like, in your talk, you were weaving in and out of science and activism, and it was just like, science is political, and if you can't even realize that we're in a community that just is so, Emily Denton, who's in our team, put it very, very well in like some Q&A I think we had together, that this is a social field. It's primarily impacting people. You are primarily investigating people. Your research is like pose recognition, video, action detection, blah, blah, blah. These are the kinds of things we're studying, right? And people still want to think of it as something that's divorced from society. And even if they think about philosophy or whatever, it's always Western based. It's just so many issues. It's so hard for me right now to think of the positive things that could come out. I mean, there are so many. It's like a tool. I mean, it's a hammer, and so there's many ways in which you can use it, right? Like if you use a hammer to like hit someone's head, that's what you'll do. But in this case, you could, it depends on what the interests are and what people care about. You could use it maybe to work on, crop disease identification, which I know some of my colleagues at Google, like Ernest is one, and in partnership with Makerere University worked on, or you could try to think so I am so excited about this work. My student Raseje, her advisor Richard, and my colleague Nialing are working on using satellite imagery to try to analyze spatial apartheid in South Africa and its evolution, right? And this was her master's thesis, and she's been working so hard on it, and we're working more on this work, and you can do all of this kind of stuff, but I mean, I'm sure there's more you can do. I know that, for example, generative adversarial networks, like I sat next to a physicist one time who was using them to analyze, to like try to figure out the origins of the universe. I'm like, how are you using that? And we were talking, and he was like, well, he was explaining to me why that they would be helpful. And that was super interesting. I talked to like I think a biologist also who was using generative models to do some like some stuff to try to understand proteins and stuff, which is super interesting. But then people are using them as deep fakes to harass women, right? Like, and so when I see the field and primarily what people do, and how I've been harassed, how my colleagues have been harassed, what I see is more uses of deep fakes, unfortunately, because that's just the people involved in the field, that's society. And when your senior leaders are also engaged in this and not condemning it actively, they're past, like sometimes I think now people have learned that saying stuff about diversity and inclusion is the right thing to say, blah, blah, blah. Like, they're not going to say like women belong in the kitchen and Black people belong, whatever. They're not going to say that out loud, but there's dog whistles, and they won't be outraged by some stuff that's happening because they don't want to. Those are their friends and colleagues doing this, right? And so when I see this, it's very hard for me to imagine a world where computer vision is not being actively used for some of the most harmful things I'm seeing right now. I mean, the queer community, people, I'm so happy that there are people like, so Alex Hanna on our team, Morgan Klaus-Schimmerman, who's interning in our team, they're like working, they're uncovering so many things that are happening in computer vision that are so harmful to the, queer community too. So it's like, when you see the community, it's just not surprising, it's not surprising at all. And so it's, yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of who is given resources and who's given power, right? Like, and currently, I just don't see a lot of people. But if you go to Black and I mean, our workshop, and there's a lot of people showing very interesting applications of computer vision to agriculture, to medicine, to in healthcare, and that's great. And it's just a matter of, like, again, like, who is going to get the resources to do what kind of work, and what kind of work is going to be uplifted in the community.
And to help people understand all that can go wrong with AI and how these real world applications that aren't thought through by the people developing the technology, could you first sort of explain how computer vision works? And then I also read a recent story where supposedly the first person to be falsely falsely arrested for a crime, he's a Black resident of Detroit, Robert Julian
Yeah.
Borchak Williams, that was then rescinded. So could you
Yeah.
help us understand how something
Oh,
like that happened?
I didn't know he was the first person, but I read.
Well, I
So
also feel like that's part of the question too, that like that's the news story, but I think your
yeah,
research
I
shows
am.
that's probably not the first time.
Yeah. So I think that so the goal of computer vision is to understand, like, images the way, or imagery, right? So to analyze and understand imagery. So, like, humans, we a big part of our brain is like, not all, a big part of our brain is about processing visual imagery, right? And so, or other animals, and like, and other kind of, and not everybody has that, but, like, it's kind of, it's one way to get information, and there are many other ways, right? And so computer vision is trying to give machines a capability to process visual imagery and understand it in kind of a similar way, maybe. And so, and reason about it. And so there are many, I think there are many, like, varying goals of varying ambitions, I would say, in the computer vision field. And how it's done is different, right? There was a whole, in the 2012, there was like a deep learning revolution, primarily because people found out that, like, if you use large data sets and have a lot of resources in terms of clusters and GPUs and things like that, these neural networks that many people have been working on for a long time, but that they say were dismissed unfairly, seem to work a lot better than expected. Now, my issue is the way in which people talk about this. Like, they once again, it shows the hubris and the just patriarchal nature of the community, in which they just talk about how, like, it works well, or like, it just, this very simplistic view, or high accuracy in certain contexts. And so so the way in which, right now, there's a huge overlap, I would say, between the machine learning, deep learning, etc. community and the computer vision community, because the methodology by which many of these goals is achieved comes from the machine learning and deep learning community. But I would say the goal of computer vision is just to give machines that capability, however you do it, right? Like, however it's done. And so in this particular case that you're talking about, I mean, for me, I see a number of issues. So I really appreciate, there's this interview with Tawana Petty, who is also one of the leaders of the Our Data Bodies project. She's been organizing against space surveillance in Detroit for a long time, and she's an artist and a community organizer and does many things. And she talked about how, educating people about space surveillance. She was like, does that really make you feel safe? Like seeing all of these cameras everywhere, is that really the thing that makes you feel safe, you know, to the neighbors? That's not what makes you feel safe. What makes you feel safe is living in an environment where your neighbors are looking out for each other, having, you know, people having hope and jobs and resources, investment in the neighborhoods, in the communities, not more policing and more kind of, you know, cameras everywhere that are like tracking people. And so in this case, I see a number of issues. One that the computer vision community probably will jump at is saying, oh yeah, like, you know, there are, it's not necessarily accurate for everybody, right? Like it can make a mistake, you know. And Joy's work, especially with you know, our paper showed that there are disproportionately high error rates for especially darker skinned women. But who knows which system is deployed where? People at Georgetown Law, I mean, I think it's the Center for Privacy and Security, to have like reports. One was the perpetual lineup report. Another one is America Under Watch, that talks about how many of these systems are used by law enforcement. So you have unaudited accuracy, but that's just, for me, that's just like the tip of the iceberg, right? You can have perfectly working face surveillance, but like that's not helping the community either, right? So if you're disproportionately targeting people, even if I stole a slice of pizza, let's say, and you just target me for stealing a slice of pizza because I'm hungry because you haven't been giving me jobs or food, and then everybody else is going around like, you know, doing whatever they want, that's not accurate in my opinion. That shouldn't be happening. So there's just a number of issues here, right? To me, that shows, you know, why is this the number one thing that this technology is being used for? I mean, it's so sad that like the research of the computer vision community. I mean, one person, I forgot his name. Who was one of the authors of this paper called YOLO. It's about object detection, general purpose object detection. Now you would think, like, oh, what's wrong with general purpose object detection? I mean, I detect objects, so why can't machines just detect objects, right? It's just, but then you see how it's being used. It's mostly being used for surveillance and tracking and targeting of immigrants and targeting of, you know, various groups of people. And he decided he was just going to leave the computer vision field altogether because he's not comfortable with it. So in my opinion, like this shows a confluence of so many issues, right? It's like things that are not accurate, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Like you can deploy perfectly accurate face surveillance, and that's also not good. You know, who is oppressed versus who is doing the oppression, and who are the people creating technology. They're not in the groups of people who are oppressed, or even working with groups of people who are, you know, oppressed, right? Like they're actively marginalizing people, speaking up on the groups who are oppressed. So it's a confluence of so many issues, in my opinion.
And so there are a lot of things to sort of take apart here, and also in seeing some of the Twitter conversation that you referenced earlier, there is a sort of retreat to claiming abstraction, or retreat to claiming it's the data set. So there are problems with data sets, which perhaps you can talk a little bit about that, but can you also talk about what this idea of abstracting a field that has real effects on people can do to continue, or you've talked about how it continues oppression and racism, but maybe how do you move beyond that and create a field that is more functional and is creating these tools that are not harmful for people?
Emily and I created a tutorial for the computer vision community, but I think it's not, we meant for the computer vision community to watch it, but I think anybody can watch it. Which was basically trying to discuss this. And so the first thing is that, yeah, I mean, obviously it's, you know, know that data is biased. Like I have worked on this for a while. You know, Joy's work shows the ways in which she has so many great names like um, pale male data sets. You know, like she, you know, I mean, we're not, you know, just yeah. So obviously data is biased, but then what does unbiased data look like? What, you know, what does that mean? Where do you get that? For which purpose? So, you know, everybody, people in the margins are constantly just harmed somehow, right? Like, so, and so it's just like it's just so simplistic to talk about that because the what happens is that now the field has basically stopped the conversation there. Let's debias this, let's debias that, let's create more inclusive data sets, let's do, you know, this, and we talk about in our tutorials mostly about why this is not enough. Actually, it was like, okay, like, well, here are the issues when people try to have quote unquote more inclusive data sets. Like, here is what happened, you know. Yeah, Emily even had this term saying visibility is not inclusion, you know. So you can have like a data set that highly represents someone, like I mentioned, you know. Sure, you might train a model to recognize someone's face, for example, but if you have if you don't have if you haven't, you know, these models right now that people use, they're not like, you know, really reasoning. I feel like they're just kind of saying, okay, like, what have I seen before? What have I seen before? And, you know, how likely is this that based on what I've seen before, right? It's not you're not actively teaching it like, okay, this is what a person looks like, that if it has to, you know, you're hoping it infers that from just the data, right? And so sure, if you haven't shown it enough faces of a certain kind, whatever, it might make mistakes. But then if you also just show it, like I talked about, one example I talked about is Unso Jo, who is my collaborator. She's a historian, and I wrote a paper, and in that paper she showed we have an example from World War II, where Life magazine was showing people how to recognize Japanese Americans versus Chinese Americans, like how to do this as a person, you know, just as a human being. So let's say you do this in you know, you do this in an automated way and just deploy it and use it against Japanese Americans to target them, right? Like during World War II. Then are you going to say then, oh yeah, it's just about the data, you know? So this simplistic nature, and what I say is that I remember I randomly, you know, you say I talk about Ruha a lot. Yeah, I do, because I mean, she's just been working on this kind of thing for a long time, and we don't listen to people like her, right? It's not just about, it's kind of like how people say, you know, to solve the problems of tech, it's about more diversity. It's really not, because sure, you should have more diversity, but if you have more Black people in a system that just oppresses more Black people, what I don't really see the point. It's just that you have more Black people oppressing Black people. If you have a system of more women that oppress more women, that's not really solving the problem. So we have to listen to the scholars like her, like Safiya Noble is another one, Meredith Brossard. There's so many people who've been working in this area, who've been thinking about this for a long time. And Ruha gave this example. She said, you know, we always talk about people going to like coding boot camps or whatever, but we don't have sociological boot camps for people who have only learned this one type of knowledge their entire lives. There's this hierarchy of knowledge. You know, we call soft skills versus hard skills. What does that mean? Mar Hicks is another historian I admire who wrote Programmed Inequality, and they were talking about, you know, same thing, like how just like more coding boot camps and things for women or for girls or whatever are not going to solve our problems, because what happens is this hierarchy of knowledge happens, right? Where one type of knowledge is considered better than the other. And actually, Almadi was my colleague, was just discussing how it really irks him when people describe me as an activist and Joy as an activist rather than like researchers. Sure, we're activists by necessity. It's like Joy says, accidental activists, because we have to do that to survive. But they're trying to like reduce our work. You know, it's so funny. Like right now, some people are starting to describe me as quote unquote non-technical, which is hilarious. Like, sure, but that's supposed to be an insult. Right? Like, oh yeah, she's more, you know, I'm like, okay, great. You know, my PhD was in computer vision, but whatever. Also, is that really your insult? Like you're trying to, that's a hierarchy of knowledge. So I think for me, that's at the root of the problem. It's not that there aren't people thinking about this. And I mean, people, with this whole Jan LeCun Twitter debacle, so many experts chimed in. Jenna Burrell's another one who gave a whole thread with like all sorts of, you know, I don't know, like reading material and all this kind of stuff. Ruha came to iClear to the conference and talked about. She had a talk called "Reimagining Technology." I believe that's kind of and some aspects that she even touched on, you know, aspects of her entire book. She wrote an entire book, right? And so to me, it's just that these people don't want to engage with that. They don't think it's technical or whatever, or like they don't appreciate that, not that type of knowledge. And I have spent most of my life just focusing on math or physics or whatever, computer science, like whatever technical quote unquote thing I have to master. And nobody has ever come to me and said, oh my God, like you don't have a basic literacy, racial literacy, or sociological, just basic literacy in this other thing, right? Everybody's always talking about, oh, American kids, you know, they need to have better math literacy and better whatever. And I'm seeing the danger of that side. I think that's one of the reasons we're having all of these issues that we're having right now in the tech world. So that's one. I think it's just the root of it is that the way we educate our scientists and engineers just needs to change. Completely needs to change. Of course, there's other things about industry and the amount of control it has and all that. Like, I mean, people like Sophia especially talk about that. But for me, at the root of it is literally the same people control industry, academia, whatever. Like it's the same people who move around. I see it, you know, and the same people collaborate with each other. And I think at the root of it, that the type of thinking that goes there needs to change.
And your role now is within a sort of ethical body, and you had a previous fellowship at Microsoft that also was within an ethical body. And could you talk a little bit about when that kind of thinking or these sort of movements within large companies of having divisions looking at ethics started happening? Because I think part of what you're pointing to too is a lack of oversight within technology that's pushing this.
Yeah, I think that it happened before I graduated my PhD. I mean, I think, for example, at Google, like people like Meg, my co-lead, had been working really hard. Other people had been pushed out trying to get this kind of work done because you're swimming against the current, right? Why should they if they don't have to? But then the danger now is, and people have been writing about it, is this ethics thing being co-opted, right? So it's like, I think Safia also talks about the depoliticization of this work becoming just quote unquote fairness, quote unquote ethics, you know? And so like depoliticizing it, that's also an issue. I mean, I think there are like the biggest issues in this field are, I think, people basically trying to appear neutral. I just do fairness, you know, math, but I don't know about the politics of X, Y, and Z, and that's not what I'm trying to chime in on. But like the math, you know, and that's harmful. That's actually harmful and exploitative, I think. And so yeah, like on the one hand, you know, you have people on the inside trying to push people to you know, do at least the right thing to a certain extent. And then you have people on the outside who have to do this too. And so there's some sort of, you know, I think there's like roles, like different roles that happen. But then at the same time, when you see, you know, like for example, I see all white men like, oh my God, like this happened in my conversation. It's like, oh yeah, like, but no, I care about bias and fairness. I created this initiative. I did that initiative. And I'm like, yeah, that was created by all white men in industry. Like not anybody, who's working with like, not Twana Petty was not in these, bodies or anything like that. And so like, that's why, a co-opting of this is happening. And so that's the thing I really worry about, actually. And so, to a certain extent, I think there are certain things that maybe you can depoliticize. There are certain things that I think are just basic, like you don't even have to call them fairness or anything. It's like documentation or robustness analysis, just basic engineering, which has dramatic effects, right? Like if you had a bridge that just killed Black people every time they walked on it, and like that wouldn't, I don't know if that's a fairness thing. That's like robustness. Like you got to figure out why this bridge is not working for everyone, right? Like, but then, I think there's different kinds of works that need to happen in this space. But when you just kind of reduce everything to like this depoliticized notion of fairness, that's extremely, I think that's exploitative and just harmful. And I see academic bodies actually doing that too. Like they just exclude all the Black women who have been working on this for a long time, all the people in the disability justice, all the queer people, whatever. And then they just go and start their own like body or conference or whatever it is so that they can just study this depoliticized notion of fairness, which is, I think it's exploitative. So that's now what I'm seeing happening, which, and people are speaking up against.
And how do you think this can be improved, or the field is being sort of forced to reckon with itself quite a bit right now, and you're experiencing a lot of pushback. So yeah, do you feel like this could be a transitory point and that can be pushed in a more positive direction if these sort of silos break down?
I always hope, right? Like, I mean, the fighting is exhausting, but the alternative is so depressing for me that I have to feel like something is possible. I mean, and I don't know which side it comes from, or like, I don't know exactly how it's going to end up, but I have to feel like something is possible. And I think what needs to happen is that people like Safia, people like Ruha, I mean, they need to be in the core computer science curriculum. Like their books need to be just required reading for everybody, and not like this, not like, oh, and then when they bring in philosophy or stuff too, it's again still this Western depoliticized white male thing, and it's like, like the kinds of works that people like them are doing need to be required work and respected, and just that's really what I think that's what I think needs to happen at the root of it, and that everybody should be required to have a certain level of literacy for these kinds of topics, and that includes me. So it's not just about diversity. I mean, I have to educate right now I'm trying to educate myself. I definitely wasn't educated at all about this, like even 2-3 years ago. I am still learning a lot. I have a lot to learn because my whole life, I'm 37 years old now, has been my entire life. I've just been focused on engineering, math, and had nothing, and all of this other stuff was, sure, I lived it and I studied about it from that perspective, but I always saw technology as separate from like racism, for example, or like the things that I was experiencing. And I'm only now starting to learn about this. And I should have been forced to have this literacy. And so should everybody else.
And well, thank you so much. And just, is there anything left unsaid that you wanted to close with?
I mean, I think that everybody thinks it's not their responsibility to do something. And everybody likes to point, I'm seeing this in my field, everybody wants to point a finger. It's hard to react when something hits close to home. And usually the people who cause a lot of harm are like your friends, your colleagues. That's basically the people. And so when someone is trying to talk to you about it, listen, don't be defensive. And it's all of our responsibilities. And actually there's a saying, I think I read it somewhere, the seductive reductionism of other people's problems. It's about like a lot of Americans going to Africa to do, whatever. And it's like, wow, like, can you imagine someone from an African country coming to the States and be like, I'm going to solve the gun violence problem? It's such a reductive thing, because when it's something far away from you, when you think it's far away from you, you don't really see how hard it is to execute on it, and you don't see your complicity in the issues. But actually, I think it's the smallest scale things you can do for yourself, educating those around you, calling out behavior that is not okay. I really think that's the most important thing people can do right now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.